Okay. Is recording. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Is that big enough, or should I make it? Oh, I can't make it bigger. There we go. Okay, so when I was learning JSON, I started out with JSON simple, and when I got into trying to do a little bit more complicated stuff, I couldn't make it work because it really doesn't have that functionality. So then halfway through the week, I skipped over to Jackson, and I like that a lot better. So my first part of my presentation is about JSON simple, and then the last part is about Jackson. We'll see how it goes. So JSON is just an easy way to transmit and store information. It's done as a string, and because it's a string, it doesn't take a lot of overhead. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it doesn't use a lot of data to transmit. It's also really easy for computers and humans to read it, and it doesn't have to, it can be transformed into almost any language. So you can start out in JavaScript and transmit it to Java or C++ or any of these different languages. So that's really useful. For instance, if you have a different technology on your front end than your back end. So, like I said, it's just a string, and it's written in a specific way. It's inside curly braces, and then it's written in key value pairs or name value pairs. The name is always a string, and it's always in double quotes. And then the value can be a lot of different things. It can be a string, a number, an object, an array, a Boolean, or a null. And here's just some examples of what it would look like. Here is a string, a number, this is an array, and an object. And then when you have multiple key value pairs, they're going to be separated by commas. And then also, if you're doing a JSON array, you can do JSON objects or JSON arrays. If you do an array, it's going to be inside regular brackets instead of curly brackets, and it won't have name value pairs. It will just have the values. Okay, so there are a lot of different libraries that you can use. And these are links just to where you can go to download the jars for the library. Again, I use JSON Simple and Jackson. I have not looked into QCJSON or JSON, but those are also great libraries. I found a resource that talked about which one was the best one, and it went off the basis of which one was faster to transmit data. And it basically said that JSON Simple, Jackson, and JSON were all tops. Jackson was really good for working with really large files. JSON was really good with working with really small files. And JSON Simple was really good just all around. It wasn't the best in either of those, but it was good in all of them. So pick whichever library you would like to use and stick with it. So if you're downloading JSON Simple, first you need to download the jar. You would just click on whichever jar you want, and then you're going to save it into a folder where you want to keep it. And then you have to add it to your library. This is a NetBeans example. If you're using a different IDE, it's going to be a little bit different, but probably similar. So in NetBeans, you would right-click on your project, and then go down to properties. And then you switch to libraries, and then you're going to add a jar, and then you're going to navigate to where you put your jar, and then choose it and hit OK. And that will import into your libraries. And so right here in your project under libraries, that will show up as JSON simple. And each time you create a new project, you would need to add that to your project. Okay, and then when you're working inside a class, you would need to import the JSON simple library. You can do the entire library, or you can do just whichever object that you need. And then here's just a diagram to show you what each thing turns into. So in JSON, if you have a string, it's going to turn into a string. A number is going to be a number. These are self-explanatory. An array turns into a list, and an object turns into a map. Okay, so here is just some examples of how to use an array, or sorry, create a JSON string using JSON simple. You can create a JSON array, and to do that, first you have to create a new JSON array, and then you add each value that you want in with add. And again, there's no name, it's just the values. If you're going to do a JSON object, again, you create a JSON object, a new JSON object, and then you use put instead of add, and you need your name and value. And if you want to put an array into a JSON object, first you have to create the array and add all of your options to your array, and then you can put your array into the object. And the same thing, if you want to add an object to your object, you have to create a new object and put all of the key value pairs in, and then add the object, put the object into the object. And then in this state, you have a JSON array and a JSON object. You don't actually have a JSON string yet. In order to get a JSON string, then you would have to do, oh, it's not on this page. I'll show you on the next page. So here's what the JSON array looks like, and here is what the JSON object looks like if you were to print it out. And then to actually serialize it, you would have to do object to JSON string, and that would serialize it. You could also write it to a file, and you're going to do a try with resource statement. And so you resource, so you have a file writer inside. So you've created a new file writer inside your try statement, and then where you want to store it. And then you're going to write it to that file with the to.json string. And that's creating it into a string, a JSON string, and then you're going to flush it to make sure it goes into the file. And then to take it out of or deserialize it from a JSON string, you would use the parser. So you have to create a new JSON parser, and then you would use parser.parse. Well, parser is your parser, and then .parse. And again, you have a new file reader and where the JSON is stored. And that will store it into a JSON array or a JSON object, depending on what you are reading in. The drawback to using JSON simple is you have to do that for each thing. Let's say you have a dog object. You have Fido, and Fido is a dog object, and it has all of its attributes, and you want to save it to a JSON string. You can't just do Fido to JSON string. You have to create a JSON object and then put each different attribute in there and then save it to a JSON string. And if you want to take it out of the JSON string and put it back into the dog object, you have to do it one piece at a time as well. If you just save it to an object, it's a JSON object, not a dog object. And that's when I went, okay, this is not very useful. And so I went to Jackson. Now, Jackson is an interesting thing in that it is made by Maven, or it works really closely with Maven, which I'm not 100% sure what Maven is, other than it helps you manage your dependencies, and it helps you compile your project, and it helps you export your project. So I was never able to actually add Jackson without also adding Maven. So let me just go through and show you how to do that. In NetBeans, you would just create a Maven project. Instead of just a regular Java project, you would do Maven and then Java application and hit next, and then continue on just regular, finishing creating your project. And then your project is going to be a little bit different in that it's going to have this extra folder that's going to be your project files, and it's going to have this pom.xml document. And that has all of your libraries and dependencies and everything out in the open so you can get to it. And so you're going to add this dependency for column.fasterxml.jackson.core. And then you're going to add in this data bind, which grabs all of the Jackson libraries. And then you don't have to go out to a different website and find that Jackson jar. You just compile this project, and Maven will go out and it will download any dependencies that you need. So that's kind of useful. And you can download Hibernate that way. There's a lot of different, Maven can take care of all of adding those in for you. So I actually am kind of liking Maven. But to compile it, to get it to download the jars that you need, you would right-click your project, you would click Run Maven, and then Goals. And then in your goal, you would hit Compile and then OK. And that's going to compile your project and download any dependencies and jars that you need. OK, so using Jackson. Jackson is a whole lot more simple. Because it has this really cool object mapper. So first you need to import the object mapper, and then you create a new object mapper. And what that does is it takes your object and it maps it, and it keeps track of what its different attributes are. So you have a dog object named Fido. You're going to use the mapper, and you're going to write value as a string, and you're going to put in Fido. And the mapper is going to go and say, okay, this is a dog object, and it has these dog attributes. And so it will name each of your different key value pairs with the correct attribute from the dog object. So you don't have to one by one add in your different key value pairs. It will do it for you. And then you can also, you can just do write value as string, or you can add this extra little bit in here that says writer with default pretty printer. And what that will do is when you write out your JSON string, it will pretty print it and put each of the key value pairs on its own line. So it's just easier to read. And then you can also write it to a file, and you would do that mapper.writeValue. And then you're going to do a new file and put the file location, and then just what object you want to turn into a JSON string. And you do all of this inside of a try-catch block to catch the IO exception. And then to deserialize, again, you're going to use your object mapper. This object mapper is reusable. If it's all in the same file together, you only need one mapper. If you have it in different classes, you would need to create a new object mapper for each different class. So here I have my dog object that's going to be named Spike. And so it's a JSON, sorry, I said it's a dog object, but it's not. It's a JSON string. Here's my JSON string that I'm going to turn into a dog object. So I make it a dog and give it a name, and then I do mapper.readValue, and then I tell what the JSON string is, and then what class I want to turn it into. It's a dog.class. And so the mapper will go and look at the dog class and say, okay, so the dog class has a name, it has tricks, and whatever else it has, and it will put each of those key value pairs into the right attribute of the dog object. And then you can also do it from a file, and again, you would just add your JSON string. You're just going to put where that JSON string is. So you do your file and then the location of JSON string, and then whatever your class is. And again, you would do that inside the try-catch block. And then just one other thing that I found that I thought was really cool. It can be a problem to write a date from Java into a JSON string, because it gets confused, it doesn't know how to do it. And so Jackson has this extra library that you can use. It's a JOTA module, and basically it can turn a date time into a string that can be converted back into a date time when you're serializing and deserializing. So again, you would just do your mapper, and then you're going to add a couple things onto your mapper. You're going to register the module, the new JOTA module, which is this here. And then you're going to disable the serialization feature, write date as keys as timestamps. And so that's going to stop the way it's going to normally try to do it, and it's going to do it this way instead. So if you have a date time, you would put it in as a date time like this, just when you're adding it to your object. But then when you turn it into a JSON string, it's going to turn it into this. And then when you deserialize and turn it back into a dog object, it's going to turn it into a date time stamp. And I didn't finish it, but it would have like the time. And if you didn't set a time, it would just be all zeros. And to do that, again, in your pom.xml file, you would need to add this dependency, which is the Jackson datetime JOTA dependency. Okay, so that was a lot of information. What questions do you have?
I don't have any questions at the moment. I'm sure we will later.
Okay. I will share this presentation so you can go back and look through it. It was kind of a lot of information really fast. And I apologize, I know if you're not using NetBeans, then it's going to be slightly different, but it at least gives you a base to start with.
So I'm just going to mention that I know I didn't bring in Maven into my project. For some reason, I copied the jar directly into my library.
Did you use Jackson?
I did because I saw your comment on the board, and I'm like, okay, well, if she thinks simple is bad, then I'm just going to go straight to Jackson. And some of the other things that I had saw, they said, you know, the first thing they listed was Jackson. So I think Jackson is, well, you said all of them are popular, but
yes.
I didn't add that in, and I don't know if that's going to cause me a heartache later. I guess I can just remember that just to get the Maven.
I don't think it will if you can get it to work. So here's the problem that I had, and maybe it's a NetBeans problem. Let's see. So in in my project here, I have Jackson added to my library, but when I try and import it, it doesn't give me the option. I can't get to it. And I'm not sure why, but if I do it with Maven, I don't have a problem. So you're not using NetBeans. It's probably a bug with NetBeans, and that's why it won't work. So if you don't have to use Maven, then that's great. I just couldn't get it to work without Maven. But Maven seems to be really nice in just adding your dependencies and adding your libraries. It's just really kind of easy, and a lot of people seem to use it. So again, I don't really understand Maven 100% yet, but I think it might be something that a lot of people use. So try it or don't. That isn't necessarily an important part of this, but just, I guess, do what works for you. But here, let me just show you my Jackson example. So I've created a couple dog objects. I don't know why I got stuck on dogs this week, but I did. And then I've got a JSON string that will become a dog object. And then here's my mapper with my date added thing. And then, so here I am going to turn that string into a dog object. And then I also have something a little bit more complex. I have a pack, which is made up of dogs. So when let me just run it. So it's really kind of cool because it will even take really complex objects and turn them into JSON strings without a problem, whereas with JSON simple, it would take a lot of time to do each of those things. It's running slow, sorry. Okay, so here is what it looks if you did the pretty print. It just makes it really easy to read. Here's my pack as a JSON string. If you don't use the writer as pretty printer, then it just creates a string that looks like this. And here's that date that will turn back into a date time. And then here is my pack turned back into a pack, and each of my dogs are in dog objects instead of just being JSON objects and needing to be transformed again. So that's all I have.
So can I, there's a couple of tools that might be, I found helpful. Did you find it was something like JSON lint?
I did not. Do you want to share?
Yeah.
Okay. Am I still sharing? I'm trying to stop. Okay.
So I'm gonna make this smaller. Close this. Okay, I have a lot of things up, but I just do JSON. Actually, I wonder if I have. Okay, so this is it right here. Okay. So what you can do is take your string. If I go back now, well, let me do it. You can take your string that your program is creating, like say, this is my string over here. And then you can come on back over here, and then you basically just cut and paste it in there, and then you can validate your JSON, and it will show you the structure, or it'll put it in this format. I guess you don't need to do that if you were to do the pretty print. I mean, that would have saved you that. But here's another little trick. Here's this thing here. I'm just going to open a new one. Where's this thing? Convert. Okay, this was cool. So you can take some JSON or take some a JSON format like this. Say you were to find some, you know, like John Smith, whatever the format is of whatever it is. And you can basically say JSON to Java and it will, it'll create you what you're basically, it thinks your code should be, the structure.
That's
And so
cool.
that was codebeautify.org. Now I want you to know that I did this once and I took it in and I've changed it and changed it and changed it. So it was fun for the minute, but I don't know how great, if that's gonna be helpful or not. It may be helpful, but it takes this and it converts it. So that's that.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to stop the recording so that it's in 2 pieces?
Do we want that? I can do that.
Yeah, we did that last week, right?
We did.